has anything to say about the deindustrialization of this country.
Georgian townhouses on the moon, the highest GDP per capita in the Milky Way. Small modular reactors under every village green. This is Anglo-futurism.
Hello and welcome to the Anglo-Futurism podcast. We are back in the King Charles III space station, which you can see for the first time, and we have a very special guest.
Yes, we have Curtis Yarvin here. Would you say godfather of the neo-reactionaries?
Godfather.
who has actually floated up here, he said, to the King Charles III space station.
In an airship.
In an airship, powered by hot air.
Of which I produce enormous volumes. You know, I am my own anti-gravity field.
Exactly.
My magnificent hot air. You know, there are actually plans. There are real plans for an airship to space, right? You know, you basically flee. You know, of course, at the high levels, there's very little air to buoy you up. So you need a very, very large airship to float in the upper stratosphere, and then you can sort of accelerate with a rocket. You know, space isn't altitude; space is velocity, right? So,
But the atmospheric debris surely will be lethal to an airship.
As long as you get high enough, basically, then your rocket can operate in vacuum, which is much more efficient for a rocket. So
we should look
a little embarrassed about our creaking wooden.
No. It has charm and bones.
Yeah.
But because we've brought you here specifically, I think, to talk about. You know, you are here in the UK.
The UK with a Y.
With a Y, and you know, we're going through, I suppose, what you'd call maybe a preference cascade at the moment, where like what was once impossible to think or out of the question is now
remarkable ideas are being heard, you know, and you go on Twitter and you see people with normal jobs, normal careers saying, hey, wait a second, a British passport is just a piece of paper.
Well, and
I'm like, whoa.
But this is the whole thing that you've been talking about, right? Yeah. Is that we've existed for the last 60, 100, 200 years,
depending on
how you want to calculate it, within like a very tight, I think you say stitched.
With a telos, with a future that's sort of clear. We're going toward this technological future of, you know, maybe the destination is the Starfleet Federation, and it's fully automated luxury communism. Maybe it's Ian Banks's The Culture. You're familiar with Ian Banks?
Surely it's the Galactic Republic, actually.
That is the kind of Galactic Republic, right? You know, and you don't have to say, obviously, I prefer the Galactic Empire, but you know, the Galactic Republic, the Federation. You know, you'll notice this in Star Trek. There's no money,
and food is all provided, right?
You've got the fabricators. It's really fully automated luxury space communism.
Yeah.
You know, and then, you know, when you're within what you chops call, I believe, the banana. You know, you could sense.
The banana, listeners, is this lovely part of London that on a map looks like a banana from Hampstead all the way down to Clapham, I suppose.
No, it comes round down into Richmond and Barnes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And crucially, Curtis, having been in the UK for a few days, has spent all his time in the banana.
So most of my time, almost all of my time in Britain. I mean, the banana is like it's an island of. It's like, what is it, Elysium in that? It's the Elysium, and then it's surrounded by, I mean, you know, to be fair, when you fly over the English countryside, you know, on your way into Stansted from Budapest, it appears bucolic as ever. That's not really the vibe. I mean, you don't get the sense that most of England is sort of a kind of burned out wasteland in the way that like most of America is. Like you haven't like if I can tell you an American story for a moment. In 2021, I just lost my wife. I was driving across the country with my kids for something to do. And we're driving back across the country and we're in Kansas, the great American state of Kansas. And I'm a little tired of fast food. And so I'm like, all right, kids, we're going to go off the highway. I see there's a small town, a medium-sized town named Russell, Kansas, just 10 miles off of the interstate. You know what an interstate is. And it's the hometown of a former senator, and I guess, presidential candidate, Bob Dole, World War II hero. And well, let's go there and find a restaurant and have some lunch. And it was one of the, granted, this is during COVID, so some of this is COVID, but not all of it is COVID. We drive into Russell, Kansas. It's like the fucking Andromeda Strain. Excuse me, I'm sorry to curse. It's just like, it's a town. It's like a beautiful, clearly a town, and it's all you see is like a few shambling zombies. Like, this wasn't just COVID. There were no restaurants. There were no restaurants in this town. Like, there was
what's a size kind of number of people?
Like, I think the population is probably 20,000, something like that. Okay. No restaurants. The life had been drained entirely out of it. Eventually, I was like, all right, we'll drive down to the freeway, and we found like a Mexican taqueria on the way there. And I'm like, all right, at least it's not Jack in the Box, and like, the extent to which, all of the old heartlands of America have been just like hollowed out and are crumbling in various ways. Some have been of these, you go to like, my late wife was from Columbus, Ohio, which, Ohio used to be an American industrial powerhouse. It was like very China-like at one time. Crumbling mansions are kind of everywhere. Some of these places have been taken over by Haitians, Somalians, whatever. Like, it's just a ruin. And then you go to Palo Alto, Lower Manhattan.
This is the international banana, right?
The international
banana. Actually, the point is not that London has its own banana.
Yeah.
It's that
Europe has its own banana.
Europe has its own banana.
Has its own banana.
It has a banana.
Milan up to London.
And what's really nice, what I like about San Francisco is like the best cities, at least the banana corresponds with like old structures from the 19th century. So it's actually like very nice and very beautiful. And you can almost feel like you're in a place where World War I never happened. When you're within one of these bananas, you're in an alternate present.
Yes. I suppose the question is like,
but it's not reality.
No,
not reality.
Well, no, that's not true. It is reality, but it is a reality for a small number of people who've been able to construct a world for themselves that is, I'm all right, Jack, and anyone else, and like people outside of it who don't fit into my model or my like way of thinking. Don't exist. I mean, I think here in Britain, we call it like the Deliveroo economy, right?
The Deliveroo economy.
It's,
it's another great term.
Yeah, that like you have people who receive, the orders, the poke bowls, I don't know, grilled chicken.
Well, let's get right into it. Let's talk about a subject which is near and dear to my heart, which is a very, very taboo subject. And I mean, of course, slavery. So when I think about there are many definitions of slavery, and the American philosopher Robert Nozick had a very interesting, very short piece. He's known for, of course, Anarchy, State, and Utopia, but actually, I think his most interesting work is like Tale of a Slave, which is very short work. And the point of Tale of a Slave is like you have this word slavery, and you can't really define what it means. He's like, all right, what if we're gonna, take a situation that everyone would define as slavery and like change it in these ways, and when does it stop being slavery? And in some ways, from a sociological rather than an economic or legal perspective, the definition of slavery is that the people who serve you are not part of your social network, or are very, very distant from your social network. So, for example,
but that doesn't necessarily apply to all forms of slavery, right? In the,
Well,
the
yeah,
Roman conceptions of it.
yeah, Roman conceptions are sort of are different in a way. And in Rome, if you were a wealthy Roman, you might have a Greek philosopher as a slave, and that's sort of a purely economic sense. But this other social sense is like, I think, captures a lot of what we find disturbing about slavery, because it is disturbing. And that is the question of the social difference between the slave owning or the slave using and the slave class. So I was thinking, currently, thank God, my house is cleaned by a friend of my wife's. This is great. This is good, keeping money within the family. Before that, it was cleaned by some Brazilians that we found, God knows how, and probably illegal. And, I look at these people and I'm like, they're very nice people. And I'm like, what is this? What is the shortest distance on the social graph between me and you? How does it run, excluding employment relationships? And I'm like, probably that social graph runs through some Brazilian aristocrats I met when I went to Sao Paulo. And the distance between those people and you is like probably 10 degrees of separation, within Brazil.
Mm.
And there's just no connection there. And that sense of using human beings as robots is what is disturbing about the Deliveroo economy. And, what's worse, of course, is that they're at least human beings. But if you look at Deliveroo, if you look at Uber, those, Uber drivers are, I enjoy talking to random Uber drivers from random countries, because you ask them about their countries and you get a very different take from the New York Times, let me tell you. And it's super interesting. All of those people are going to be replaced in a few years by self-driving whatevers. I don't know what they're going to do thereafter. They might leave and go home. They might turn to cannibalism.
No, they'll be supported by the largesse of the state, won't they?
Indefinite leave to remain.
Yeah.
And the I love the term in indefinite leave to remain.
I think that what's interesting, right, about this is that actually there are few people who see an issue with this, conception of a difference. And actually, it's even quite a modern idea in that Britain, was a country of servants, and who were treated often appallingly, right? These were young girls.
Yes. Well, they were treated often appallingly, and yet the connection between master and servant was closer than in the Deliveroo economy. They may have been treated appallingly. They may have had this thing where you absolutely had to, your life was over unless you get a good letter of reference from your previous master, right? There were definitely of course, Carlyle, who's my personal guru, looks at this and he finds this system appalling, because he's like, the more impersonal it gets, the uglier it is. And the fact that servants are fundamentally on what Carlyle calls the nomadic principle, rather than, he sort of compares this to, forgetting about the West Indies, he compares this to sort of the feudal world where your servants are really effectively part of your family. Your family is your set of dependents. This is why when we use the word emancipation, we use it for freeing, a child, like a very annoying teenager might apply for emancipation from the parents, right? I've certainly heard that in threats from my teenager, and that harkens back to the Roman law, in which basically, essentially, a slave in sort of from the legal perspective is an adult unrelated dependent, is in the same position as a child. If my 17-year-old runs away, I can call the slave patrol and get her hauled back, right? When she's 19, she's gone, right? But she's 17, she's not emancipated. I can tell her what to do. I have all sorts of very Roman powers over her.
Okay, but why do solely like Anglos or Britons care about this and actually like treat this as a non-desirable state of affairs, right? Like, I lived in...
No, it's not only us, but we were among the first.
I've lived in like Hong Kong, where having these like indentured like Filipino helpers, very normal. Senegal,
for some reason the Filipinos like just really thrive.
But go on, like what is it? What is it about the Anglo world that has changed? Like had this change in perception? Like, is it a Christian thing?
I think it's an individualist thing, and it's a sense of like. Yes, I think it's ultimately a Christian thing of a certain class, because you're essentially saying, someone who is, a master of other people is sort of by definition, in a way, an aristocrat and even a noble. And once upon a time, the nobles of the past basically had a very tight circle of moral concern, and they were very comfortable in basically seeing the people that were part of their manor, whatever. They saw them as human beings, but kind of fundamentally different in a way from them as nobles. But there was still a sort of Christian respect for them. And what we've developed into, the way the modern noble thinks is they're just like, they want to turn everyone into a noble. They think that everyone is naturally a noble, and that makes them very, very uncomfortable with any kind of hierarchical relationship where they are at the center. They are uncomfortable being masters. And in the irony of that system is that if they were comfortable being masters, they would actually have a much more human relationship with their servants. But the more, it's like, for example,
but that hasn't been driven by the nobles, though, right?
Well, yes and no. So for example, you're probably familiar with the various, here are two sociological phenomena today that show that, of course, Carlyle has this great line. He's like, you can abolish slavery, but all you're abolishing is the word slavery. The phenomenon is a human universal. And let me demonstrate that the phenomenon is actually perfectly understood by our friends, the libs. Here are two examples of that. Number one, you've probably heard the phrase gig economy.
Yeah.
Right. And when libs complain about the gig economy, they're saying exactly the same thing as Carlyle, who was in a way a lib. They're saying exactly the same thing that Carlyle is saying when he says that money is only the only nexus between man and man. They're basically saying the gig economy is sort of the extreme of that, in which basically, think about the difference between you have a chauffeur. Your chauffeur is part of your family. He's been in the family for years. Like, he's going to live and die as part of your family. You know him personally. You give him a gift, every Christmas. He loves and respects you. You respect and cherish him. On the other end, Uber. Your Uber relationship is like, an Uber is exactly the opposite of that. Your relationship with Muhammad or whoever is driving your Uber. Actually, in America, here, of course, the Uber drivers tend to be from the Middle Eastern world, so you might get Muhammad. But actually, as an American, of course, our Arab world is basically Mexico. And one of the things that gives you, it's not Muhammad, and that gives you, like, it's often Muhammad, but, what you can't say when you step out of an Uber, almost ever, I think, in the UK, is, thank you, Jesus. I mean, it would be Jesus, but
no, absolutely.
I always want to say thank you, Jesus. But
I hope you're doing that whenever you step out of any car.
Well, I survived, right?
Yeah,
and in any case, the spectrum from this lifelong personal relationship with your servant to this 15-minute long gig economy relationship, even libs feel that there is something wrong with the gig economy. They're basically like, this could be a personal relationship, but it's not. So basically, libs understand slavery because they actually despise the gig economy in the same way as Carlyle, defender of slavery. But you know what libs adore? Actually, and you don't hear this actually so often anymore, but you used to hear it quite a bit. The Japanese system of lifetime employment. So in Japan, if you're a salaryman, a salaryman, you basically go to college and you get hired by Toyota, and the expectation is you will work for Toyota for life. And it becomes like a bond, like Toyota is your church. There are literally Toyota hymns that you sing every day. In the morning, you wear a uniform, like, and the idea of like you get fired is like the level of malfeasance that, yes, it's possible. The level of malfeasance is overwhelming. And it is actually not normal to go from Toyota to Mitsubishi. Like, why would Mitsubishi want to hire some guy who didn't work at a Toyota? Like, what? Right. And so actually that builds a sort of bond between employer and employee. It's not a personal bond. That is exactly, what is lifetime employment? It's slavery. It's the same thing. Libs love it. The company provides for you healthcare, whatever. You're not a cog in the capitalist economy. Toyota is your government. Toyota has its own NHS, the Toyota Health Service. I don't know, something like that. Don't know exactly how that works. And people without that association look at this bond and they say, it's good to have the bond. It's bad to have the gig economy. And so you can tell that libs still understand Carlyle in this way. And by the way, I'm going to finish ranting here. But one of the you've gotten me on the subject of my personal guru and savior, Thomas Carlyle. The entire 20th century is descended from Thomas Carlyle. And let me tell you how. A lot of people see Carlyle as a predecessor of fascism. They point out that Hitler in the bunker was reading Carlyle's History for the Great. This is true. On the other hand, Carlyle is the mentor of Ruskin. Carlyle begets Ruskin. Ruskin begets the Fabians, who were originally Ruskinites. And so, Fabianism is like all of liberalism today, and I gather it's still quite a thing in the UK today. And so actually...
Well, we're going through our own Fabian scare at the moment.
Oh, is there a Fabian scare? Tell us.
Oh, yeah. It's suddenly everyone's looking for people with Fabian connections. And
how did this happen? What was the Fabian...
Well, there was
tell me the story of the Fabian scare.
Well, there's a councillor who's just defected from the Labour Party into Reform, who's a member of the Fabians.
Is he infiltrating?
Has
he left the Fabians?
Obviously, as a Fabian, we have to presume that he is.
The original logo of the Fabians, right?
Yeah.
But it's something very sinister. Yeah,
the wolf in sheep's clothing. Like, what balls, what chutzpah to have your logo be the wolf in sheep's clothing. I mean, my God.
Well, let's zoom out. Like the roots of modern Britain's decay are surely more than the change in the relationship between master and servant, right? What's the Yarvin view on what's going on here?
Well, when did the decay of England start?
Probably the 1850s.
Was it 1066?
No, I'm not gonna Putin on you guys, right? But of course, are you Catholics, Anglo-Catholics?
I would say
I'm
you're
an Anglican.
High Anglican.
You're a high Anglican. He's not a million miles away. I'm godless, I'm afraid.
Like me.
We have a Catholic producer over there.
Are you a fellow Jew? Or are you a no Jew?
I'm afraid I'm not a fellow Jew. But I was brought up in the CV. I was a choir boy. So the culture, I'm steeped in the stuff.
Culture, yeah. I actually had, I had a strange, speaking of why am I so Anglophilic? I had a strange experience at the age of 10, which was that my
as a choir boy.
I was not molested.
Kenneth Clark appeared to you.
No, but almost. So my father was an American Foreign Service officer, a proconsul of our Empire of Love, and he was posted to a former possession of yours and one that you fought very bitterly to retain. I refer, of course, to Cyprus. So we came to Cyprus, and for whatever reason, rather than sending me, of course, I couldn't go to the local schools, but rather than sending me to the American school, they sent me to the English school. I'm actually listed as one of the English schools, like notable old boys, which is not true because I was only there for 2 years. I'm not really an old boy. But I know what old boy means, and I know what a school tie is, and I know what houses are. I had I was a day student, but other than that, it was a full kind of Harry Potter experience. And in the morning, did we sing Anglican hymns? Oh, you bet we sang Anglican hymns.
Oh, in the break, maybe we can get into some of that.
And
well, he might want his Spurs.
So I got kind of a little bit, Anglicanized, Headmaster Humphreys, if you're out there, and so that made me a little bit, Anglophilic and empirephilic. But I would say, some people just pin it straight up on the Reformation, but really the axial age of England today is, of course, the 16th century. Like everything, there's really nothing new after the 16th century. You have the incredible woke regime of Edward VI.
It's John Dee and then silence, we would say.
Edward VI, crazy revolutionary time, followed by the insane epic counter-revolution of Mary Tudor. And it was just everything was so metal at the time that I kind of love them both, I love Reginald Pole, I love Latimer, it was so real. All this shit was so real, but here's the problem. So Henry VIII, wow, like what a figure, right? But the thing is, this ends up, of course, in the regime of Elizabeth I. And you can say a lot of good things about Elizabeth I, Elizabethan England, world of Shakespeare, whatever, English Renaissance. But, the thing about Elizabeth I is the 2 problems with her. One is she's a girl. The other is she doesn't have any legitimate heirs, direct heirs. So the problem with being a girl is that she's sort of not really a natural king. She tends to delegate a little bit to her civil service.
Doesn't do many executions, right?
Yeah, well, but there was a thing with Mary Queen of Scots where they're like, oh, we might, they're like, why don't you sign the death warrant so that we can do this if we have to? And then they just fucking do it. And she's like, I didn't say do it. I just signed the document. Or like, oh, sorry, you misunderstood. Oh, we'll go and try to put our head back on if you want, and there's this kind of insubordination there. I don't think her dad would have stood for that. I don't think her dad would have retained Cecil after he pulled that shit, because nobody pulled shit on freaking Henry VIII. And so already there's this sort of, shift toward a kind of ceremonial monarch, even though she's really still pretty much in charge. You see these issues developing. Then, of course, she has no, natural heir of her body. She never marries. Some people say she was pregnant at some point. Hard to know. Of course, did she fuck? What do you think?
We wouldn't want to disclose her American what actually went on.
Yeah, exactly. It would be treasonous. It would be treasonous to even speculate.
It would be treasonous to even speculate on such a subject.
But I think it's.
But if she did, wait, I'm still putting here. If she did, basically, it was to no avail because she's replaced by James VI of Scotland, aka James the First. And the thing here's one of the things that's sort of interesting about English political history is that, James the First, very interesting guy. I'm sure he spoke with a horrible Scotch accent, wrote all these things about the divine right of kings, et cetera, et cetera. You never see Henry VIII.
Very big tongue, apparently. So
really?
Yeah.
Like a kiss to your tongue, the guy, who's the lead singer of Kiss? He had his frenulum cut so his tongue would go out farther. I don't know that. Yeah, wow. I did not know that about James the First. Yeah. Of course, I think there are allegations of homosexuality there as well.
Yeah. Duke of Buckingham, I think.
Yeah, well, he's English, it's
it's allowed over it.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's a poofter, he was an aristocrat, and the everything that is good in life was good to him, right? And The problem is he did not have a domestic base of power, and that's why he's constantly insisting on his formal powers, that his informal power is weak. And one of the kind of mysteries of sort of English history is like, all right, you've had parliament since time immemorial. Like, what is up with the Tudor Parliament? Why is we never hear anything about Parliament? Parliament clearly exists in the 16th century. Why do we not hear about it? And the answer, I believe, is that it's basically like the Supreme Soviet. It's like a rubber stamp. Like it starts to get a little bit touchy with Elizabeth I. She has some issues with the Puritans. She does not like the Puritans. If she could see the future, she would like the Puritans a lot less, but she would probably burn them and become a Catholic. But
the weak position, the position on Elizabeth is she didn't burn enough Puritans.
She didn't burn enough Puritans, and she's a Protestant or Protestants. It's like and so in any case, you have already this insistence on the absolute power of James the First. Bespeaks a weakness. Already you have this kind of deep state phenomenon forming with the Cecils, with Walsingham, with the administration of Elizabeth I, and this sort of only worsens in the kind of Jacobean period. Like the king, the Stuarts are sort of losing. In a way, James I is the first Hanoverian. He's an imported king, right? And because he's an imported king, he doesn't really fit in the power structure. It's not like George the First, but he's an important.
But the Tudors in some way as well, right? As like, that actually, I think the interesting thing is, as you say, we start getting this deep state who has an opinion of how Britain should be run. Because Elizabeth, very weak queen.
Yeah.
It's
strong by comparison to Elizabeth II, right? But weak by comparison to Henry the.
Sure, but we have this like period as we go through history of now. This emerging, as you said this like empire of love, right? That you have people who basically think that power rests with them because they have a kind of better understanding of how Britain should be run.
Like the Cecils are like the first like Platonic guardians, right? In a way. And so already you're seeing, this sense of like, the patriot dictator king kind of breaking down in a way. And,
to your chagrin.
Of course. Yeah. And that, culminates, of course, in the drama of Charles I. And now the Puritans are really like, and one of the things is sort of a bitter pill for like a believer in the American system. You're like, oh, like the common law, Cook and Blackstone, Cook spelled Coke. Can't even tell you. And Blackstone, the founders of the common law. And I'm like, man, these guys were like, the Mark Elias of their time. Like they're just lawfaring, and they come up with this whole idea that the law is above the king, which is such a political solecism. It's a heresy in English law. The king should be above the law. The law should not be above the king.
Well, let's talk about that, right? Like for you, right? Because power, as you say, it should rest with the king. There should be a very clear sense that the king has the power to act and command, and
the power of exception, or as it is known, the theory of the Schmittian theory of the exception is well known in English law. It's called the royal prerogative.
Sure, but isn't the problem here that actually power is always more complicated than that, because power will find an equilibrium that means that an absolute monarchy in the form of, say, a Bourbon style like absolute monarchy will find it much weaker. And I think it's we draw it back to the modern age and then think about like going forward. We have this situation of like lawfare and whatever you do, you will get attacked by someone because you're damaging their sinecures, you're undermining their sources of power and revenue. In many ways, this is like a very stable. It's a much more stable situation. And like if we talk about like adaptive systems that adapt and like are able to channel.
Oligarchies are very stable.
Exactly.
And they tend to be destroyed from outside rather than from inside.
Well, let's say this then, that like, the restoration of an absolute monarchy, the Stuarts say, obviously, that's what we want.
Well,
I think Tom's a bit more skeptical, but we, power when it is concentrated in one place is highly unstable. You can achieve potentially more, but it undermines itself,
it wants to decay, and monarchies want to decay into oligarchies. And the American pattern is that every 75 or 80 years we get a president who is really a king, and then his power decays. So if you look at, for example, the current American regime, kind of our American Fourth Republic, it begins in kind of the personal monarchy as essentially the dictatorship of Franklin Roosevelt. And, who I guess wouldn't be the first Dutch monarch of an English-speaking,
it's still a sore point.
Yeah, it is.
They're not true monarchs.
Yeah. Every time I hear the phrase "glorious revolution," I'm like, I actually, when I was the other day, when I was on stage with Alistair Campbell, I
hope you've washed your hands.
I several times, but I managed to slip a little Mandy Race Davies on him, and I was like, well, you would, wouldn't you? And so FDR creates this. He's the CEO of America. He's got these amazingly talented people working for him, and in 1944, he picked a new vice president every time. And in 44, he knows he's dying. Americans don't know he's dying. Americans don't even know he uses a wheelchair. He knows he's dying, and he picks this fella, Harry Truman, to replace him. And it's a bit weird because Harry Truman isn't really even he's not even a progressive. He's like a sort of machine Democrat from St. Louis. He's like a man of very limited intelligence. He used to actually be a haberdasher, right? And why does FDR, who's just conquered the world, pick this like nobody to replace him? The answer is very simple. It's a pharaonic move. He wants to be replaced by nobody. He wants nobody to ever have this power again, and instead power is going to be decapitated by his death, and it's going to flow down into the agencies. And basically what we call the deep state is just the kind of successor oligarchy of the monarchy of Franklin Roosevelt. And so like those oligarchies tend to be quite stable because you can't replace an oligarchy with another oligarchy. Basically, oligarchies run on procedure, and there's no procedure for getting rid of the procedure. You basically just need to get what was the river that Hercules used to clear out the Augean stables?
I don't think it has a name, but he clears it through the Aegean stables, right?
Yeah. And the only thing that can fix that is monarchy. The only way that you can sort of, and not monarchy in the sense of like, in Silicon Valley, we have we don't do monarchy usually. We do diarchy. We do co-founders. Somehow in Silicon Valley, like Y Combinator, I'm sure without thinking about it, reinvented the Roman system of two consuls. What else was run by two consuls? The Manhattan Project, which was just a straight up Silicon Valley startup, right? But within the government. But in the 1930s, 40s. And so, that oligarchy cannot sort of displace itself, or it cannot change itself. It's sort of responding to these complicated oligarchical incentives. But, anything with unity of command, whether it's one leader, a diarchy of two, can just sweep it away.
So this is your solution for Britain. I mean, the essence of Yarvin thoughts is that democracy has been overrun by the cathedral, these unelected
democracy has become very, very, but that's for a reason. And the reason is that democracy
a powerful monarch figure will sweep through all that clutter and actually ensure the state can achieve things. So is this your solution for Britain?
Yes, I mean, and you had a Republican. The great thing about parliamentary sovereignty, a doctrine which has since been abandoned in favor of the rule of law, or God, Allah forgive me for uttering the words, the Supreme Court.
Don't worry, it's going. It's going. We're going to get rid of it. We're going to get rid of it.
I know, but I have to tease you still. When I saw that Britain had decided to have a Supreme Court, the vibe was like, does any of you have a younger brother?
Yeah.
Imagine, you see your younger brother wearing your clothes. Oh, no, this is not the way.
No, wouldn't it be worse? Wouldn't it be your older brother wearing your clothes?
That is worse, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Really
Hold
sad.
on a second.
That is really sad.
We're still the older brother. And then let's
older,
let's
but
imagine.
smaller.
Let's imagine that you have the ear of influential people here. You actually can impose a blueprint on this country. So you sweep away all the Blairite reforms. And the person you empower, is that King Charles or is that someone else?
Clearly, you have a wonderful system of parliamentary sovereignty. And I don't know if you know how the definition of parliamentary sovereignty used to be expressed in the English system, but
we could make laws on the moon or something.
You can do anything but change a man into a woman or a woman into a man.
That,
But we've learned a lot about hormones since then. And you could have breasts. Parliament could give you hormones and make you have breasts. So and it would stop the whole Norwood thing, right? And like,
why would you stop a distinguished Norwood 2?
It's true. It's really the ideal.
You should stop the Norwood 3.
Norwood 2 is, like, it's true. And actually, as you age,
where are you at? Are you?
I'm like a Norwood -1, and
-1.
-1. And the problem is that as you age at a certain point, there's just no getting around it. Aging is inexorable, and you go in one of two, directions. Either you Norwood, or you look like an old lesbian. And I'm clearly heading in the direction of old. I think you're going to look like an old lesbian.
I've got my 60
like Masha Gessen, you're going to have a Masha Gessen vibe. Good genes.
Yeah, I'm buying my carabiner clip already.
It's important to have good genes.
But yes, would King Charles be your CEO?
So first of all, basically, I believe in parliamentary sovereignty, and parliamentary sovereignty allows you to, choose a prime minister with the powers of the king. So, currently, of course, anyone who finds themselves in Downing Street realizes this is the prime minister. Not only does the king not have the powers of the king, the prime minister no longer has the powers of the king in practice. And so restoring the powers of the king to the prime minister is great. I think that, there was an interesting precedent that was set in 1688, which is that, vast effrontery, but it's still the precedent, which is that Parliament has the power to choose the king and choose the succession of the king. And Parliament in 1688, for instance, decided that we're just not gonna do the Catholic thing, and we're gonna find the closest Protestant heir, which is like some weirdo German who doesn't even speak English. Good enough for us because he basically fills the king-shaped hole in the Constitution and allows you to have no king, even though everybody thinks you have a king. So, in a sense, also James I is filling this kind of, king-shaped hole. And so it sort of depends what you're doing in a way. I think that, sometimes the leader has been like, Richelieu and Mazarin in France, a man of the cloth. That can be a thing. Of course, there's a lot of great corporate CEOs. I don't know how, I don't know what the social ideas of Sir James Dyson are, but he's the closest thing to a Musk you have.
Well, or Demis.
Alex Fitzgerald.
Or Alex Fitzgerald, exactly.
Fitzgerald.
So who's Alex Fitzgerald?
Alex Fitzgerald is a friend of ours who's been on the pod who is now setting up a network of factories across
Called
the country.
Isambard. Creating
what?
Isambard.
to prepare us for conflict when the when the need for
when the Chinese no longer send us like free shit.
Yeah, exactly.
That's lovely. So that's one approach.
Dyson branded like Hiluxes with Dyson branded tactical trucks with big 50 cal machine guns on the back.
right?
No, they make a lovely. They're very silent actually because they use the Dyson.
Oh, right, they're the cyclone. Yeah, yeah. It would have to be more of a Gatling, Gatling electrically. So obviously, there's a wonderful fact, which is that the Stuart succession runs through like the working kings of Liechtenstein. So, and actually, I believe his name is Prince Joseph Wenzel. Is
the current one?
Yeah. Prince Joseph Wenzel is like
Joseph the First.
Yeah, Joseph the First.
Joseph
You've
the
never
First
had
of
a
England.
Joseph before, so there's that. That's an opportunity. Can Parliament do that? Well, it did that in 1688, so I don't see why not.
So then King Joseph gets rid of the NGOs, he gets rid of the charities, he gets rid of the lawfare. Is that your vision? Sweeps away everything that is an emblem of the cathedral.
I mean, it's like, we are at such a point in obviously, I don't have to tell you that the current government of England is very different, from Nazi Germany. On the other hand, basically, there's a very useful and like palatable to libs analogy that can be used here, which is that you can't really stop short of the power of Allied military government in Germany. Because Allied military government in Germany was basically like total year zero, like we're going to sort of do justice to everyone here, like if you have a piece of property, like certainly you can keep it, but we do not care about Nazi laws. Actually, we don't even recognize the concept of Nazi laws. If there was like law that was passed in 1936, it's just like a piece of paper. Like what? Who cares, right? What we're dealing with are facts on the ground. And the reconstruction of Germany from like the facts up, ignoring sort of all of the ceremonial like meanings of the old, it's like sometimes when I think about like what Republicans want to do, I'm basically like, wow, if you guys were in Germany after 1945, you'd be like, all right, we got significant problems. Not going to paper them over. Significant problems with the shit stuff, right? The SS is like very anti-Semitic, so like bad things have happened due to anti-Semitism in the shoot stuff. So we're going to basically, our first move, because we consider this really important, we're going to stamp out anti-Semitism in the SS. And if you go in the SF's like cafeteria, like the drinking fountain, you're going to have a poster that's like Jews are good actually, right? And we're going to make it actually pro-Semitic. So we'll have, obviously there's still a Jew or two left in Germany. Like if they want to join the SS, like, we'll waive the physical fitness exam. Like we clearly need affirmative action to bring more Jews in the SS. Because that was not the approach that was taken in 1945.
The point here, right, is that we've existed in this like very constrained, you say, oligarchic style. There's charities, the NGOs,
and these institutions are felt to be eternal.
Exactly, they're eternal, and like, I suppose the question I want to ask is, what is the compelling case to be made to like why this is illegitimate? Because we can talk about like how a lot of history has been kind of altered or conveyed like in a way to support this current system,
but that's actually normal. And so
this is exactly
actually
like but why is this one so illegitimate?
It is perfectly legitimate, but it has lost the mandate of heaven. It is illegitimate only because its performance is poor. But it's really quite illegitimate. And, like the shit that this government does, like, I'm just like, what? Like, here's one example. Mauritius.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Yeah, it's a bit of a preoccupation.
And like the detail that really stuck out to me is thanks to this win. Actually, Mauritius abolished its income tax because they don't need to tax the Mauritians anymore. They can just tax you. And like,
it is devastating. The
it's
permanent
insane.
encapsulation
And
of
it's
government
just
that's not
this
working for
pure
its people.
negative externality. It's not even the government not working for people; it's working against them.
Although this is the desire,
conflict of interest
but
there.
this is the desire of the people, right? Like this is, you talked about the empire of love. Like it is something in the sort of Anglo-British, American, whatever you want to call it, like spirit,
right?
Is to like give of yourself and like actually not be that self-interested.
So yeah, because actually, it takes us right back to our favorite subject, slavery, right? Because if you're essentially giving to someone and not being self-interested, they become your dependent. What is it? Oh wait, it's a slave. Right.
Yeah,
and so because if someone is dependent on you, you can say, even if you're not telling him to do anything, tomorrow you could tell him to do something and he would have to do it. And like you're just, you can't not tell him to do something. All you can do is tell him to be idle, which is probably not good for him.
Which is what we're telling Mauritius.
Yeah, although we've had, as
yeah,
things like
good.
Argentina, countries like Egypt that were supposedly these like dependents, Oman, Yemen, that whole like region, right? That weren't officially part of the empire, but were sort of dependent colonies. That like, we see the emptiness of that dependence, right?
And the dependency, even if the dependency is just being under a security umbrella, being under Britain's nuclear umbrella, do those things still work?
I think if the American technician comes over and twists the right.
Well, we just bought some fighter jets that have which have warheads on them, which for me is a troubling sign of a lack of confidence in Trident, which is our submarine mounted. But one thing we do want to ask before we cut to a break: why, in your view, is it the case that post-colonial countries are often, in some regards, performing worse than they did under colonialism?
That have now been freed from like the slavery of
I don't. If you're asking me to explain something, it should like need explanation. Okay, and it's just obviously it's a very much worse governance, and I got actually I don't think Alistair knew quite what he was getting into with me, and I got some good lines. I got especially some lines of his that I think will be quite delicious if quoted completely out of context, which is there will be a video of Alistair Campbell saying, "How do we put the aliens in charge?" He actually said this, and and the reason that he said this was that I quoted a great Englishman on the subject of governance, Alexander Pope, who said, "Of course, for forms of government, let fools contest. Whatever governs best is best." And I'm like, if the best government is aliens from Tau Ceti, how do you, then that's the government I want. And he's like, how do you put the aliens in charge? And I'm like, depends on the aliens. But I really actually really strongly believe in Pope's maxim, and Pope's maxim sort of flies in the face of the way that people think about democracy and power today, because in a way people have been sort of corrupted by ordinary people obviously don't have power, that's ridiculous, but they feel powerful in this kind of pornographic way. Like, who do you support? The Tories or Labour? I don't know. Who do you support? Chelsea or Manchester United?
Israel or Palestine?
And is your support helping Chelsea or Manchester United? Well, you might say you cheer, a little bit or whatever. No, you're watching on the telly, right? Actually, to say that you're a supporter of Chelsea is a little bit wrong. You're actually experiencing this sort of, sports is sort of the kind of pornography of power in a way. It makes you feel like you're engaging in sort of a political structure, like your army is winning, but actually it's completely infertile. It's completely onanistic. Right?
Well, yeah, although British recognition of Palestine now suggests that actually when you have a government that has assumed this similar like understanding of how power should work. That i.e., if you win the popularity contest or you feel like it's
Well,
bad,
recognition has taken on there's this American thing called the Stimson Doctrine, which is basically, Stimson, the Secretary of State in the early 30s, saying we're only going to recognize you if we like your government. This is basically the American version of the Brezhnev Doctrine, which is like once you go communist, you got to stay communist. Like, it's like saying once you go black, you never go back. And you can cut that.
personal experience.
I heard it from Milo. He's ex-gay. He doesn't gay anymore. Like this.
Is he ex-gay?
Yeah.
He's got the sodomy clock.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
He was looking for someone to keep an eye on him and basically prevent him from ever.
Can I imagine Milo being with a woman? I can't, but like celibacy, it's great. It's probably good for him. He should lay off a lot of things, frankly.
On that uplifting note, should we cut to a break?
Yes, the pornography of power demands
the pornography of power and Milo, right? But the fundamentally pornographic nature of democracy in an era where we all agree that politicians should not actually control the government is, of course, very reminiscent of sort of the pornographic meaning of like a ceremonial monarchy, where probably most Englishmen in 1720 had no idea that George I was not really the king.
Well, I'm going to make the executive decision. I'm going to be the king that we need and say we will cut to a break, but we will be back after a brief word from our sponsors.
The Tempsford tablet was the traditional food of workers in the silicon wafer fabs outside Tempsford in the second half of the 21st century. Workers wanted food that didn't create any crumbs that could gum up the Caxton X-ray lithography machines developed at the site. One enterprising housewife, Laura Watkin, modified bovine suet-producing cells to make a pastry that was rich, buttery and jammy at the same time, and moulded it around peppery chunks of liver, bacon and onions, creating the Tempsford tablets we all know and love. Today, we at Watkin & Sons continue Laura's legacy, producing tablets according to her original recipe. Perfect on Earth and in space, tablets are ideal for fast solar voyages, as they don't create problems with air filtration systems. So if you are fitting out a generation ship for the Andromeda system, contact our sales reps now. Tablets come in traditional pepper liver, cheese and chutney, strawberry tart, and cauliflower. Minimum order 5 billion units. Listeners, viewers, welcome back. We've polished off almost a whole bottle of red in the break.
I'm fine. It's fine.
There was no claret. It
was just a rum. That's all right.
Claret and clarity is what we're going to be striving for the next 40 minutes or so.
Clarity and claret. Curtis,
isn't autocracy bad in some ways? I mean, some listeners might think it not. Some it's a lot of claret. Unpatriotic listeners might hear what you're saying about, restoring King Joseph, and they might think that having a king was not altogether good for some subjects. And of course, this is very traitorous and disloyal. But we must pose this question to you nevertheless.
Well, what we say when we mean, I had an interesting dialogue the other day with a certain, actually a fellow supporter of the Iraq War, although I think we both changed our perspective. I refer, of course, to that great English, or rather Scotsman, Alistair Campbell. And Alistair Campbell was waxing, very big on the importance of an independent judiciary. I guess you have this Supreme Court thing, which is an American. I'm like, you really you did that, and couldn't you give it a different name at least, like call it the extreme court, something
the mega
the mega court, the hyper court, the super court, the ultra court.
No, we have the star chamber. is what we should call it.
The Star Chamber. That's absolutely. That was an actual room. There was a room with stars.
Bring it back. Bring it
the
back.
Star Chamber. That would be amazing. Bring back this. Bring back. It wasn't the Star Chamber. It was Star Chamber.
Bring back Star Chamber.
It's like Ukraine. There's no article. That's not the Ukraine. Excuse me. It's Ukraine.
Yeah.
So in Star Chamber, and he was waxing very large on the benefit and the value of this independent judiciary, which he himself, Alistair Campbell, helped bring into being, and the independent judiciary. I'm like, when you say independent, do you mean unaccountable? And he kind of he was a little flummoxed by that.
That is the point.
He was a little flummoxed by that, I have to say. And and that's exactly sort of the point when you say autocratic. Let's get the word here, autocratic, meaning self-governing, meaning beyond any accountability. Obviously, the czar is unaccountable because no one other than some terrorists with a bomb has the power to basically question the czar's decisions, right? And so, the remarkable experience of the United Kingdom or England or whatever you want to call it over the last 4 centuries is that you've rediscovered a new form of unaccountability, and you've gone from the divine right of kings to the divine right of Whitehall. And actually, Whitehall is just about as removable as James I. Well, it's just about as removable as Charles I, actually, who really thought he was unremovable. And he had this line where he said, a subject and a sovereign are clean different things. And that roughly applies to your relationship to Whitehall. And so, because only God can remove a principal private, only God can remove Sir Humphrey Appleby. Right. And so you've replaced Charles I, an absolutely unaccountable monarch, with Sir Humphrey Appleby. And in fact, Sir Humphrey Appleby is a lot less accountable than the Blessed Charles, because you can, of course, cut off Charles's head with one blow. But to cut off Sir Humphrey Appleby's head requires some kind of industrial abattoir system, because there's a lot of Sir Humphrey Appleby. So, ask yourself, if you're an opponent of, autocracy, is that really an improvement? Is replacing a single unaccountable monarch with an unaccountable oligarchy really a good thing?
I suppose the underlying point is that, terrible things like, holocausts could equally happen under a bureaucracy.
Yeah.
And then it's harder to actually prevent them.
Absolutely. And they would be stranger and creeper. I mean, of course, the Holocaust itself is implemented by bureaucracy. It's implemented by a small bureaucracy, but like Eichmann had a staff, and so actually, like you basically even in this word autocracy, you've basically sort of brought up this ancient political question of custodia ipsis custodes, who shall watch the watchdogs? And they're just like, chew an English to James I, the answer was very simple. You have one watchdog, and he's watched by God. God, of course, I'm an atheist. God may or may not exist. But you know what? If your king believes in God, it doesn't really matter if he exists or not, does it? Right? That was a pretty solid system. And then you're like, no, we need more watchdogs. And then it turns out there is no one who can possibly watch Sir Humphrey Appleby. And there you have it. And then Sir Humphrey Appleby gives his powers away to Brussels. And at least Sir Humphrey Appleby is in the country that he rules. So his neck is in the country that he rules. So there's at least a horrible and bloody way that you can get rid of Sir Humphrey Appleby. But once he moves his power to Brussels, you're done. You're absolutely done. So autocracy.
The plucky English voted out.
Well, we'll see. But the thing is, if you don't believe in, and you may have heard of the European Union and its so-called democratic deficit, and indeed, if you vote for EU Parliament, it's basically like voting for the next Windsor. You're voting for someone who actually has no power. So it feels like you have power when you vote for the European Parliament, but actually the European Parliament is I guess I would say, it's a joke, right? And the real power is the European Commission, which is just as independent, meaning unaccountable, meaning autocratic, as our dear American Supreme Court. And by the way, I hear you guys have a Supreme Court as well. And for the first time I heard that, I was like, it's totally like your younger brother wearing your clothes. It's like embarrassing. Except it's your older brother, but he's like a little brother. So it's just bad. It's bad juju. Please do not do this. Please, England, Anglo-futurists, do not copy us.
Well, it's gratifying to us that you should use the word Anglo-futurist. We're glad that it's broken containment across the Atlantic. Yes. What does it mean to you?
What does it mean to me? Well, unlike most Americans, I'm a huge fan of the Victorians. I love the Victorian vibe. I love Kipling. I love
India's greatest poet.
England. Yeah, I mean, if Sadiq Khan is an Englishman, Kipling is an Indian. Right? And actually, there's an American. The what if all hist guy, he's a Zoomer and his name is Rudyard, and I just assumed that he was Indian, but he's not. And where's the name come from, Rudyard? And when I think of Anglo-futurism, I think of the enormous, think of for example, the Cape to Cairo Railway. Did we ever get the Cape to Cairo Railway? No, we did not. Right,
we got a through traveling the.
He tried to make
one person has ever
last
traveled.
Last train to Zona Verde, right? But imagine the Cape to Cairo Railway. Imagine the branding. Imagine what the tickets look like. Imagine the fonts. Okay, and now, here's what I think of as Anglo-futurism. Take the Cape to Cairo Railway. The technology has changed. It's not the past, the future. What about the Cape to Cairo space elevator?
Point-to-point travel.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Think about the Starship. Think about Elon's
on a ballistic trajectory.
Think about Elon's Starship in English. Elon Musk is an Englishman. He's part of the diaspora. He's South African. There should be the Union Jack on the side of Starship.
But it should be a maglev, right? Because the whole point was that it went through for roads, was that it went through British territory.
Yes.
And so it should be a maglev
the whole
with the royal
maglev,
seal on the side.
The
Metroland in Kenya.
The question is, how quickly can you go Cape to Cairo? Or a Hyperloop even. Elon Musk is a South African. That makes him an Englishman. He's part of the empire. He's from the White Dominions. And if Elon Musk could build a Hyperloop from the Cape to Cairo in an hour and a half, that's a different world.
The missing piece in his business empire, his legacy.
The missing piece. And my hope, it's hard to hope this. It's a hard, for someone, people don't change their spots when they're that age. But, but there's a solution to this, which is ayahuasca. And if you imagine Elon drinks ayahuasca.
I was not expecting that.
Imagine if Elon drinks ayahuasca and realizes that he's actually the last high Victorian.
No,
does he not become a circus stripper? That's the risk.
No.
Well, he doesn't ayahuasca typically convince ayahuasca is typically, surely is devastating to people's sense of drive and achievement. If they reach peace with themselves, then they don't achieve great things.
No. He would. Yes, that's true of many people, but I'm convinced that Elon himself would reach a new level of war with himself. He would feel challenged as he never felt before, and he would realize that his ambitions are too small. And the thing is about Mars, Mars is a cope. Okay, if Mars...
It's all about Antarctica. I don't know if you're familiar with
I know. If Mars was on... Mars is worth... if Mars was on Earth, would I rather live in Mars or Camden, New Jersey? I would pick Camden, New Jersey, and that's saying a lot. Antarctica, no-brainer, right? Would I choose Antarctica or Camden, New Jersey? Probably Antarctica. I don't know if Camden, but I'd be safer. I feel safer in Antarctica. Frankly... no one was ever mugged by a penguin, right? And the like, right. But Mars, like radiation, it's like really bad. You're basically saying, like, this is why Mars is cucked. This is why Mars is cucked, because you're basically saying Mars is kind of the cuck chair of Earth. You're basically saying, all right, I'm not interested in power on Earth. That's fine. I'm going to sit in the chair. You libs, do with my wife what you will. I'm going to watch.
But you could say this about America when it was settled by the Puritans, that America then was the cuck chair.
Yeah, but we came back.
Now it's just, I'm afraid the Brits are in the cuck chair.
We came back and we fucked the bull. We fucked John Bull.
This is not the view of the Anglo-Futurism podcast.
I'm just saying, that's
Calum
actually,
Jonathan.
That's something that happened. Brother Jonathan fucked John Bull, right? And like took the bull, like from the rear, right? And like, understanding, like, look at what happens in 56. Like Britain tries to preserve her empire, and like, Eden gets on the phone and like basically it's just like, submit, bitch. Uses quote barnyard language. I don't know if we know really what curse words Eisenhower used to Eden. But picture Eden, he's a tall man, he's vigorous, he looks like he's like the true husband of the English speaking world.
True daughter, true son of England.
True son of England. And here's this fellow Eisenhower with a German name, little short guy, little bald-headed guy. Actually, it's sort of the reverse of the usual bull scenario. And he bends Eden over. Right? And he's just like, all right, you want to keep your empire, good luck, driving your cars with no oil.
Does it make sense to think of an Anglosphere? Do you think we're kind of in eternal competition with the States, or is there kind of kinship between these?
The Anglosphere is real.
Trump said we're kind of, two notes in the same song or something like that.
It's the first British Empire. It's the Anglosphere is absolutely real. And the thing is, the internet is making the Anglosphere into a reality. So obviously globalism gave us the worldwide cult of George Floyd, which was an insane thing to see like not only the UK, but like Iceland and like Inner Mongolia go nuts for George Floyd. I have a George Floyd theory that I want to, run past you guys. So imagine everything about the situation is the same, I can't breathe, whatever, when only one thing is different. So imagine that George Floyd had, instead of being named George, he had a traditional African-American name, such as Jaquavius. Justice for Jaquavius Floyd. Do you think it would have flown in the way that it did? Do you think Englishmen could be like convinced to be like justice for Jaquavius Floyd? Because I think the name George is like, it creates empathy. Like,
I'm inclined to agree. Actually.
George is a person.
I would almost say that it would reverse.
It would reverse. Iceland would go wild.
In that actually, it highlights ever more the injustice.
Maybe, but I think it's a bridge too far. Like, it's a good thought experiment, like justice for Jaquavius Floyd, right? But now we have Charlie Kirk, who is like the opposite.
And something of a similar
Indeed,
process.
You could be named Charlie. Many people named Charlie. Kirk is Scottish for church. Mm-hmm. And like you see that, and you're like, this could be me. He's and like. And I think it's very interesting as an American seeing that there are like Charlie Kirk memorials in England. I'm just like, yeah, actually we are like one Anglosphere in a way. And actually the same lesson that American conservatives are learning from the Charlie Kirk affair, which is basically that these people want to kill us, so we better kill them first, is something that Englishmen are learning as well.
Well, I mean, let's talk about that, like the Reform Party, right?
Yeah, because
as our foremost, vehicle for skull crushing.
Yeah, exactly.
As the like, the who would be the people, who would be the vehicle for this like anger and frustration.
But didn't you say Trump was kind of 1% of the reforming energy that you want to see? And reform
It's
themselves are
still
probably
small.
like a fraction
It's
of that.
still small,
that 1%.
and reform is still a fraction of that in a way, but it's like, actually, as the Overton window moves, it's not the role of Farage, or Trump to push the Overton window. Frankly, it's the role of the exonauts. Because actually, people with a responsibility and something to protect will move into that vacuum. But as long as, the window of discourse, which is now completely transatlantic, I mean, I sort of, in terms of the Twitter conversation, I almost can barely tell which side of the Atlantic people are on. And that's new, and that's super interesting. And so you have, I guess I've decided that rather than sort of new right, I prefer the phrase young right, because it is young. And it better win before it gets old. And, the young right is completely transatlantic. And it is connected by language and connected by perspective. And so you see this sort of culture, and it's not just transatlantic, it's trans-Pacific, like Australia, New Zealand, even, forgive me for your word, Canada, right?
Well, I was going to say Japan as well, potentially, which forms this interesting potential intercourse.
Yeah,
as well.
but Japan is definitely not part of the Anglosphere.
No, sure, but there's interesting how already there is cases of Japanese politicians, this new party, whose name I can't remember.
Sanseidos,
coming and meeting, the reform or going over to the US, an interesting.
Yeah, I've gotten some good press in Japan. To quote Tom Waits, I might be going a little far, but the great Tom Waits song, "Big in Japan." Big in Japan.
I mean, on that question of if it's not Farage's job, what do you? And this is, I think, a question that everyone is slightly asking. Who do you give credit to, or where do you lay the credit for that shift, that the fact that things have moved and the space for conversation has massively expanded?
Yeah, I think that, Trump deserves some credit. Elon deserves some credit. Elon deserves a lot of
the purchase
credit.
of Twitter, I think, was
monumental. I mean, it was just it was not a bad way to spend $40 billion, and, perhaps he's even made a profit of it. He had to be forced to do it by a court, as you may know. And that, if there's one word that, besides all of if there's one arguably negative word that applies to Elon Musk, it is mercurial. He is a profoundly mercurial individual, and it's kind of that. And he's mercurial, and I might even say he's Dionysian. And that mercurial and Dionysian quality is the sort of the therapy for the kind of Jupiterian and kind of the stale Jupiterian and Apollonian energy that created this giant worldwide 1945 empire, what I call the Empire of Love, has sort of become extremely stale over time. And the genius has departed from it, and the time servers, frankly, taken over.
I've always wondered whether actually the correct word for this post-45 period is actually not Apollonian, but volcanic, in that it is the ugliness that has created, that relentlessly creates, and yet it's ugliness, and ugliness is like an inevitable part of that creative process.
Vulcan, of course, is a servant of Zeus. He serves Olympus. He serves the gods. He's loyal, but there's this darkness to him. And I think that essentially, Vulcan will supplies the energy. He's like the nuclear reactor in some ways for the power of Zeus. And I think that it's sort of, it's kind of rotted into this sort of mechanical source of energy. And I think so volcanic is an interesting, it's to say that it's volcanic is sort of to say that it's defined by its source of power. And like it's like power controlling itself. So like in a way, I think COVID was very volcanic because essentially if COVID is kind of gain of function research. Is sort of Vulcan unbound. It's like basically you're saying to these scientists, like, your nominal as a virologist, your nominal goal is to defend humanity from viruses. But your actual goal in your real career is to get grants. And in order to get grants, you have to have an impact. You have to show that what you're doing is important, that it has,
and sexy and attention grabbing.
It's sexy and attention grabbing. And the way to, and makes a good headline in science communication. And the way to write an effective, sexy headline is to say, wow, this bat virus could mutate to kill us all. Makes you feel pretty relevant. We saw it in SARS 1. This bat virus could mutate to kill us all. And how do you write a paper showing that the bat virus could mutate to kill us all? You mutate it yourself.
We made it so you don't have to.
We made it so nature doesn't have to.
Yeah.
Right? And the experience of COVID is like, I guess not everyone has a smart, nerdy tween. But, I realized this analogy when I did have a smart, nerdy tween who's now more of a teenager. But I was like, let's say you come home from work and you find that your 10-year-old is setting fire to the kitchen curtains. And you're like, Henry? And he's like, well, it's science. I'm like,
Athelstan?
Science?
Athelstan, what are you doing?
Athelstan. Hey, Henry, good enough name for 9 kings of England. It's good enough for me. If you know of Henry the Ninth, but
no.
Henry the
Sorry, we're going to need a quick detour.
Steward. He was a steward. He was a cardinal, actually. Like, he was a pretender. Yes.
I thought you made a mistake.
Your
but
Jacobite roots really coming out.
Yeah, my Jacobite. After a little too much claret, my Jacobite is coming out. And I actually have a Jacobite drinking glass, for the king over the water, right? And, in any case, he's like, but it's science. I'm like, science? I'm like, well, he's like, well, science tells us that like 60% of house fires start in the kitchen, right? So what would happen if there was a fire in our kitchen? Like, could we get out? Could the dog get out? And it's that moment that you realize that you've like suddenly gone and now you're in like, we need to talk about Kevin territory, right? And like we've discovered that our relationship with science, which we used to feel that was like this like thing that was leading us to the future, like a child, like a beautiful child who's going to grow up and go to Oxbridge. And then suddenly we're in like, we need to talk about Kevin territory, right? And that's what gain of function research was like when you let the experts do their thing without a king, because Fauci, who like amazingly, insanely both ran the program to create COVID and then ran the program to cover it up and then ran the program to like solve it, no one was more autocratic than Fauci. Did Americans have any way to unelect Fauci? No, he just like retired in the end, like a freaking king. And so you have all these like little kings, right, whose heads are very, very hard to separate from their bodies. And actually, when you put the virologists in charge of virology, or you put the diplomats in charge of foreign policy, they have this conflict of interest because they want to make more and more of an impact. And so the diplomats will come up with some reason why we need to expand NATO to the east for reasons. I don't know, we need to protect our vital supply of Dnieper carp or something, right? Reasons, right? And it's just like, wow, you just like caused this enormous human calamity. Yeah, why not a king? Because no king would ever have said yes. No king asked, should we mutate coronaviruses to make them more dangerous for reasons? I guess we'll know more about this. He would just be like, what?
Well, wouldn't give away Chagos. Wouldn't let Argentina put bases on Antarctica.
Or Chile.
Or Chile. Well, less of the threat. Less of the threat.
I didn't know there was a British Antarctica problem. Is British Antarctica under threat like the Malvinas? Does it?
Well, I'm going to give you the quick spiel. It's a real hobby horse of ours.
Don't know the British Antarctica
So
question.
Britain claims a chunk that's about 1/8 of Antarctica,
By claims, you mean
including
oaks.
including the peninsula, and that is actually exposed rock.
And the peninsula is the best.
It's the best bit.
This is the best bit.
could build there.
On this
And
podcast,
mine.
we're
and send asylum seekers there.
we this has been
With
mooted.
appropriate housing,
Well,
of course.
They probably go to the South Sandwich Islands.
It's referred to as the HMP Weddell Sea.
HMP Weddell Sea is what we're trying to make catch on.
Incredibly based.
So yes, on this I mean, it's just us on this podcast who are agitated about this.
Yeah.
But I hope the FCDO is listening, because
With nuclear power, you can do anything with Antarctica.
Well,
you can
and,
blossom. It can become green.
China has a proper airport on the other side of Antarctica, and other countries are building bases. So the worry is that, given the mineral riches of the Antarctic, which could be kind of made legally available from 2048, if we don't assertively say this is actually ours, which other countries are doing now,
They have
then
rare earths down there.
then,
gold, they have
it's just going to be gone, like the Chagos Islands.
Yeah.
But if we had
I mean, the Chagos Islands aren't even
king,
gone. Like you're still like paying for them.
We're still leasing them. I mean, this is an interesting thing you say here about, like, the people who do the work are fundamentally like maladjusted or
It's a conflict.
They're interested.
It's a conflict of interest.
So
it's like a very straightforward conflict of interest.
So these, this king, or I think we can imagine a prime minister who is then. I mean, I've told Tom about this. I had a dream.
Your
once.
dream, Tell us about your dream.
I had a dream once where I became prime minister. Go into my first meeting with the king, and
Was your deck?
and he said, and keep trying to give him more powers, and he's frankly like quite put off by. He's like.
He doesn't want the power.
He doesn't want the power.
The revolution was first in the mind of the king, and it's still in the mind of the king.
He doesn't want the power.
If you could give Charles III a brain transplant, he could make England great
He
again.
not only has a bad brain. is
Charles
what
the
you're saying,
King.
but-
No, it's treason.
Sorry, that is treason. That is treason. He has a wonderful brain.
But this is the point, right? So a king comes, in the form of Farage, in the form of Charles, in the form of someone who's able to a Cromwell. I mean, it is a Cromwell. It is a Cromwell because it's someone who can sweep aside these structures. And I suppose the real question is, once you have the power, because we've talked a lot about power in the abstract and who acquires it, how does it like melt into the institutions, but where does Britain start going from this? Because frankly, if we start saying, right, well, actually, we're going to start reclaiming all the lands that we need to build, a metro land the whole way down.
A couple of things. First of all, basically, I think it now should be clear to everyone. You may recall Harold Macmillan and his speech about the wind of change. And I think it's now very clear to any historian that there is no wind of change. What there is actually a giant fan in Washington. And the thing is, when you turn the fan off, suddenly there's no wind of change. And to quote a line I don't know who came up with this line, but it's a good line. The line is, you can just do things. And when the fan
I think that's Plato.
And when the fan is off, it's off. Not only is it off, some say it's never coming back again. Some say there is no fan. And, the idea that, let's say in 2025, England takes back Suez and, is Donald Trump or even Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom, God forbid, going to call up, Prime Minister Farage and scream curses at him and threaten to cut off his oil? It is the laugh, right? And so actually this cage that everybody thinks they're in no longer exists. And actually you can just walk past the boundaries of the cave, there is absolutely nothing, for example, stopping Britain from making South Africa great again.
What would that entail? You're not talking about like
It would probably
recolonizing.
involve some guns.
Well, but the point
it
is,
would be neocolonialism, right?
like let's Jamaica is a good example, right? Of like the beauty of Kingston, the beauty of Kingston,
the physical geography.
Yeah.
You must know the line of God, who is it? It was a poem about Ceylon. In Ceylon's tropic isle, where the soft breezes blow, and only man is vile. You could say that about many, many places on earth. I mean, this is Froude talking about Dominica.
and people talk about Uganda.
I'd say that. I'm sorry, I would say this about your native California.
That's so true. It's sad, but it's true. And like only man is vile, right? But the real estate is tremendous. Now, California is a long way, it's many oceans, complicated thing. I'm not asking you to take back California.
He's saying that. He's worried.
I love it. No. Please rescue us.
I spent 6 months there last year, as I said,
from the Babylonian captivity of California.
It was devastating to learn that we'd never actually occupied it as Brits.
I know. Every time I'm like, I start an event in California, I have to be like, I need to acknowledge that this event is occurring on occupied Bourbon soil. Be that as it may, how we acquired California, it did in fact come into our possession. But I mean, there's so many, and this is something, Bronze Age pervert has really spoken about, which is
friend of the show.
Bronze Age pervert, the great, one of our greatest living philosophers, has spoken about the tropical Aryan, homeland, which is clearly a tropical highland. And we have all these areas on the earth, including like Ceylon, in which there are like tropical highlands, which are like eternal spring.
It's bizarre. I went and I spent in
spring.
the tea plantations up in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, Ceylon.
In Ceylon, I beg your pardon. It is surreal.
Yeah.
The mistiness and the fogginess,
misty, cool climate, and it never changes. Sometimes it rains, sometimes it doesn't rain, and you're just like, this is the original Garden of Eden. Like, we're very close to heaven here, And I mean, this is what attracted Arthur C. Clarke to Ceylon. I mean, that and the little boys,
Satanic zone.
Satanic zone. Right, let's face it, there were certain aspects of the British Empire that maybe we don't seek to recreate,
An empire of love.
The truest kind of love. A love with some mentorship, the Greeks had many words for it, they sought its essence, And we all seek the essence.
Agape.
In any case, look, the British Empire had many aspects, right? Like any system, it wasn't perfect, right? And was it straight? Was it gay? It was all these things, right? It contained all of humanity within itself, and then, Eisenhower turned on the fan and it all vanished. But the wind of change is dead. We are in the calm of change. You can just do things. And actually, the idea, I'm not saying, it's the first or most essential, task of the Anglo-futurists to restore the empire. I think conquering space actually is like, from space you can conquer anything, so conquer space, and then from there Uganda. But Uganda is a paradise.
It's a paradise. It's one of the most beautiful climates. You grow crops the whole year round. Unbelievable, bounty.
Unbelievable bounty, and instead, do you know what percentage of its food supply in terms of calories the continent of Africa imports? Take a wild guess.
I mean, I would assume it's 90 plus.
It's 90 plus.
Yeah.
And so we've basically taken this amazing, the dark continent, the continent that should be the home of the Cape Cairo Railroad.
Well, the most abundant continent.
The most abundant continent, full of abundance. And instead, we sort of turned it into this sort of open-air human farm, fed by fed like a salmon farm by salmon chow,
Well,
scattered from above.
by international charities, right?
That's
Who,
right.
you know,
That's right.
the greatest demand for charity, the greatest need that a charity has is more suffering.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
I think
It makes money from suffering, and it's like basically the old tale from India where they put like cobra bounties and people started
Yeah.
breeding cobras, right? There are all of these, what these people with these kind of Fabian dreams and dreams of like government by scientists and expert and all of that did not realize is that they were creating just all of these bad incentives. And the bad incentive of let's turn, an entire continent into a squalid open air human farm. And we're not even harvesting the organs, right? It's just why would you do that?
But it seems that you're suggesting that it's because Africa is in this condition, it would perhaps the West ought to intervene. But why shouldn't
everywhere in the world? Let's remember Pope. For forms of government, let fools contest. Whatever governs best is best. How should Africa be governed? First, it has to be regoverned. First, the anarchy has to be eliminated. There has to be. Imagine a futurist Africa in 2100, and there's a computer. Oh, this is science fiction. There's a computer that knows how many Africans there are, down to a single digit, where they are in terms of position. Just the way, if you're like a rancher in Wyoming, where all your cattle are, thanks to modern whatever, where all these people are, what they're doing, and your goal is for them to thrive as human beings without breeding too much. What a vision, right? Imagine restoring order to South Africa. You don't need to make South Africa all white to restore order to South Africa. You just need governance. You need everyone in South Africa to be governed. And maybe that's a different problem for a bunch of Jewish philosophers than a Xhosa township. But everything in the earth can be reduced to order. And so, when the fan of change was blowing in Georgetown and basically making everything fly over the place and destroying order, it was impossible. But now that the fan is at least semi-shut down, maybe Trump will shut it down more. The task of, you must know the famous lines from Virgil about the task of Rome.
I don't think I know that bit of Virgil.
Yeah, this is the, I don't know the Latin, but to...
that wasn't in the Latin GCSE.
What is this?
You come to England, you expect fluency in Latin.
I know. I don't expect everyone. I don't expect the Deliveroo driver to know this Virgil.
We're only day boys.
Yeah, exactly, day boys. And you didn't get the real lessons. But basically, there's a passage in Virgil where the sort of role and purpose of Rome is described, and the phrase to subdue the proud and spare the conquered is just the task. Virgil's the task of Rome is to govern the earth.
Okay, well, I want to put something to you.
And that today could be the task of Britain.
But imagine a continent where, governance is poor. There's lots of crime. They're clearly not running their affairs well.
We don't really have crime. Crime is a euphemism for anarchy.
Let me finish. And there's another country across the ocean that does things much better. With that in mind, why shouldn't China or Japan be in charge of America?
Well, it's funny. I had a conversation about 10 years ago. This Uber driver picked me up in San Francisco, and he was bitching up a storm because he just had a ride down in a neighborhood we call the Bayview, and it's not a good neighborhood. And and I said to him, and I'm like, of course, every Chinese schoolboy knows about the unequal treaties, where basically the West, creates this world of Shanghai, which has extraterritorial government, so it's physically in China and on Chinese land, but it has French law. And they're able to do this because of the superiority they have both military and even fiscally. So I don't know about militarily. We'll see about that. Hopefully not. But fiscally, the flow has definitely reversed. And, China has like $13 trillion in like treasury securities, which represent its, receipts for all these dildos we bought from them over the past, 20 years, right? And other consumer products, of course. And,
dildos, Tom.
And I thought of, and I discussed with this Uber driver basically ways to kind of solve the problem. And I think one problem is basically one solution is basically reverse extraterritoriality. So, if the word for America in Chinese, I'm going to butcher the Mandarin, is Meiguo, the beautiful country. So, everybody in China wants a piece of the beautiful country. You don't have that, but you've got these green pieces of paper, so why not convert them? So you could basically say to China, look, we owe you all this money. We bought all this stuff. We used it up. We threw it away. Even the dildos wear out. Actually, I've got a review there. It's not good, right? But in any case, obviously legitimate debt, don't really feel like paying it. Not sure. So here's a proposal. Extraterritoriality. So you take basically a piece of California, such as, for example, West Oakland. I don't know if you've been to West Oakland.
Yes, I have. Yeah. No.
And how did that work out for you? Obviously, you're here.
Well, there was a shooting like around the corner from where we were, and it was just a kind of another day in the local news cycle.
Yeah. Obviously, you're good at ducking, But in any case, West Oakland, problematic situation. We've proven our incapacity at governing it in various ways, but neocolonialism, and so we basically cede West Oakland, and it becomes an extraterritorial under Chinese law. And then Chinese police, how in Beijing they have the police officers with the white gloves directing, and so, basically if there's any sort of, it's under Chinese law enforced by Chinese security forces. So if there's any kind of, bad behavior, then, the guys in white gloves are they blow the, and then right, jaywalking, right, and I mean, first of all, anything involving, both Asians and African Americans is inherently amusing. Number one fact, and it's just how it is. I don't make the rules, right? And this is sort of tremendously valuable for China because you can put factories, you can et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And for Americans, they can drive to Chinese West Oakland. I made the mistake about a year and a half ago of going to a restaurant in West Oakland. The food wasn't very good, and it cost me $500 because I needed a new rear window, and Audi has some special laminated thing, and I'm now actually I will go to West Oakland and I will walk around West Oakland at any time and day or night. And I will feel completely safe.
Sip your bubble tea.
Sip my bubble tea. And if anyone starts to mess with me, I'll press
you'll
a
take
button.
a nap.
You'll open your WeChat.
Yeah. I'll open my WeChat, and a drone will appear above, the head of the situation.
And then your assailant's organs will be harvested with that trial.
The drone will have a megaphone, and the megaphone will right, and then, that's the first step. And if there's no compliance with these orders in Chinese, which maybe the guy doesn't understand, I think he'll learn to understand them. And, to me, this idea of extraterritoriality in West Oakland is just the very definition of a win-win situation, which is what government exists, to find. Often things are a zero-sum game. This is not a zero-sum game. And so, Chinese Oakland, beautiful, beautiful idea.
I suppose there's some question there of and this was the thing that powered a lot of the sort of anti-colonial attitudes, that people have this great sense, and maybe you would say that this is a Soviet-driven thing, that it was imposed upon, and this was actually part of the fan, or the whatever you want to call it, coming out of Moscow, but that people have this great sense that they should have
I think you're
control.
Referring to what Hobbes was referring to when he talked about the desolate freedom. Or sometimes I just translate it and I say wild donkey because wild ass is like,
We're familiar with asses here.
Wild arse.
Well, you're English, right?
No. An ass is an ass.
It's a donkey.
No, I know.
The desolate freedom of the wild arse. That's something we're very
That's
familiar
Calum's
with.
weekend.
That's something we're very familiar with in San Francisco is the desolate freedom of the wild arse. And it is, trust me, it is desolate. But the thing is, basically, essentially when people ask for sort of political power, as subjects, recalling the Blessed Charles statement that a sovereign is subject to clear different things, they pretend to be subjects who are consumers who want just better customer service. But in fact, they want to be sovereigns, and they're basically, addicted either pornographically or actually, God forbid, in the real world, they're power addicts. And actually, the whole system of democracy, or so-called democracy, or like managed democracy, because remember, these systems are all autocracies in the real world. Your system of managed democracy engages the subject in this sort of pornographic feeling where they really feel like they're in charge. It's like, in America, we have this amazing institution called the National Football League. I don't know if you've heard of it. Like football, American football. It's very football.
Gridiron football.
Gridiron football. Right. And there's a team, actually, in general, the business structure of an American football team is very like the business structure of a Premier League team. Although there's a thing you do in the Premier League team that frankly weirds Americans out, which is that in America...
Relegation.
What?
Relegation.
No, relegation is very cool. We love relegation. Actually,
Rank and yank.
my son's soccer team, excuse me for using that word, was just promoted.
No, soccer is actually, the Lindy British way of referring to
because it's
football.
association soccer. Yeah. In any case, my son's soccer team was just promoted, so I feel very good.
Which one was that?
He plays for a little,
I saw it through a Premier League team.
No, it's not a Premier League team. It's a little club team in the Bay Area. But they moved up a league because they were good. So that's a good thing. No, I refer to something else that is done in European sports that we don't do in America for reasons. We trade players. We don't buy and sell players. And when I see this, basically, I'm like, all right, he's not being abused or anything, totally fine to be Mbappe or whatever. But like, in America, we feel a little bit funny about buying and selling human beings, especially if they're from African descent.
I see that there might be a little...
the vibe is wrong. And we're just like, Mbappe was sold for 80. I'm like... I'm like, guys, we don't, could you not?
It's the best bits of soccer here. It's so exciting. And they have a deadline.
The transfer window, whatever.
Yeah.
We don't do that. Right. I like, in terms of just territory, of course, buying and selling land is like very, very American. And so the important thing is that the State Department cannot stop you, will not stop you in any way from restoring the empire.
Until they figure out that actually they would like an empire of their own.
They already have an empire of their own.
An empire is one empire is a threat to another empire, right? That's in the same way that the American empire, for the American empire to exist, it had to wipe out the British. In theory,
but like a threat is like, let's say you're like in prison, okay, and somebody like basically disrespects you. Okay, that's a threat. You need to fight. You need to shank the guy. Whatever. But of course, in American prisons, we're into these like long sentences. You're like an 80-year-old prisoner, and like somebody's like, drinks your soup or whatever. Okay, yeah, it's like a threat at a certain level. But are you going to shank the guy? You're 80 years old. I'm just like, if a new, restored regime, whether it's, Farage or whoever, is like, we're going to take South Africa back, nobody can stop you. Nobody can stop you.
And this is what Samo said. Similarly.
Sam Abuya was on the pod.
Maybe he got it from me, but
America is destitute of ideas and energy.
And here's another example. So, in a way, the person that's really the kind of iconic 21st century leader, although his country is very small, is obviously Nayib Bukele of El Salvador. Now, the day in which the Spanish-speaking world has to be saved by someone named Nayib is like, that's a little disturbing because it takes you back to like 800 ID, right? But okay, I don't know if there was a Caliph Nayib, but there could have been, right? In any case, basically, Bukele, in a familiar refrain, decides that he can just do things. For example, he can just like end the reign of terror in his country. He can just do it. And if he does it, people will love him. He will have a 90% popularity rating, and he will be reelected forever. And he has like 5 brothers, so his like regime will last forever. But the downsides is that he should not forget that he's part of the democratic world and the United Nations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you tried this in 1975, when the Empire of Love was still young.
Well, America's going to come down on you like a ton of bricks.
That's right. So you're going to have like massive student protests. You're going to have 3 different urban guerrilla movements, one funded by the USSR, one funded by the Chi-Coms, one funded by the US. You're going to like last like, you have the life expectancy of an icicle in the Sahara, right? Today, Bukele does this stuff and he's like, vaguely disapproving editorial in The Economist. IMF becomes harder to deal with. Like, nobody wants these things, but like they're manageable, right? And so like he discovers that he can just do things, and he just does things, and he like I've been down in Salvador a couple of times, and the previous time I was down there, I guess. I didn't desire to try this experiment. I just found myself trying this experiment because I was at an event. I had to bring my laptop, and then I was like, I need to walk across the main square of the old, district carrying my MacBook Pro, and I don't have a case. And I'm like, I feel fine about that. When I visited the equivalent area in Sao Paulo, much bigger, more powerful state, they're like, do not take your cell phone out. And even in London, I think that carrying a naked MacBook Pro around in any part of even in the banana is probably a bad idea.
I mean, I walked across not Westminster, Waterloo Bridge yesterday twice with my lap, and I definitely in a way that exactly.
I would clutch it tightly
in a way that I think it makes you very aware of
defensive,
Well, and I mean, Tom and I, when we are on Earth, of course, and not in the space station, are in Brixton, and that is a
no. We're slightly close to Herne Hill.
Sorry, we're on.
But we're near this rough part of town.
The lyrics, "The Guns of Brixton," kick down your front door. I mean,
we're ready for that eventuality. Let the listeners be aware.
I feel like Alistair Campbell is sort of living inside a Clash song, like permanently, and it's terrible. Like, I'm lovely musicians, but I'm not going to glorify crime, and I think he does, and he prefers crime to grammar schools, that's where you are. He prefers crime to Latin. And Guns of Brixton, in Brixton I wouldn't, and I was going to take my laptop to go and work in a cafe in Finchley, and I'm like, I'm not sure I should, and that's where you are, and in El Salvador, I was in San Salvador, I was just like, wow, I could feel completely safe doing this is insane. And it was just the vibe. It wasn't what I'd read on the internet or whatever. I was just like, looked around me and I'm like, yeah, nobody wants to fuck with me. Yeah.
So that's where we are.
CCOT,
we talked a bit about, where we could be.
Yeah.
What do you think is the kind of best case vision of Britain, say 50 or 100 years from now?
Britain is totally capable of resuming the leadership of the Western world. And I say this as an American. I'd love to see America compete with you and follow your lead. But I think that actually a Britain that says we're going to become the new leaders of the West is a Britain where basically any American who wants to go to an elite college will find an Oxbridge that is like miles ahead of Harvard. You might need to know a little bit of Greek and Latin. Hopefully you've studied that. It's like, the crown of the West, as Napoleon put it, the crown of the Western world is in the gutter. Pick it up with your sword. You can. You can. You can.
I think that marks a good place for us to finish. I need to go home and start polishing my sword. It's a dirty place, the gutter.
I need to get my head measured.
Don't worry, Tom. I'll deposit it with I'll deposit the crown.
Calum's already got his calipers.
Yeah, the skull calipers are adjustable for Norway. Don't worry.
But Curtis, before we send you back down to Earth, back down on the space elevator, exactly. You got the choice, obviously, of
His Majesty's
the Cape,
space elevator.
of the Cape or Suez. Where can people read more of your work?
On graymirror.substack.com. That's gray with an A, the American way.
Please, listeners, hold your noses while you do it.
Curtis, it's been a total pleasure having you on. Thank you very much.
Absolutely delightful. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.